In my book, Dandelion Wine, I have all kinds of short stories about all kinds of wonderful people. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mom, my dad, my brother. And about that special time in life when you're 12 or 13 and you find a really great best friend. And when I moved out to Arizona when I was 12, I ran across a remarkable boy, John Huff. And we had a friendship that went on for 6 or 8 months. And then I had to leave and go east, and I knew I wouldn't see him again for years and years, and it hurt terribly. I don't think I ever got over the hurt of leaving my best friend behind. And I'm happy to say that 38 years later, a couple years ago, John Huff, that's his real name, came back into my life, and we're back in touch again. But in the meantime, during those 38 years, you miss your old friends from when you were a boy, running through the green summers. So while I was writing Dandelion Wine and looking for old memories, trying to remember those things that had hurt me and helped me and bewildered me and amazed me during the summers of my early teens, I remembered John Huff, and I remembered our leave-taking, and I reversed it, and I began to write this story about John Huff, which is in Dandelion Wine. And when I finished writing this story, I was in tears. This often happens to me. I'm either laughing because I've done a joyful story, or I'm exhilarated because the story exhilarates me on some level or another, or I'm in tears, as with the lake and various other stories of mine. And every time I've ever read this story, and I've heard this from other friends of mine too, it manages to make them cry because they remember a time in their life when, as a boy or a girl, they had to leave and go somewhere and leave someone behind forever. So here's the story about John Huff. The facts about John Huff, aged 12, are simple and soon stated. He could pathfind more trails than any Choctaw or Cherokee since time began, could leap from the sky like a chimpanzee from a vine, could live underwater 2 minutes and slide 50 yards downstream from where you last saw him. The baseballs you pitched him, he hit in the apple trees, knocking down harvests. He could jump 6-foot orchard walls, swing up branches faster, and come down fat with peaches quicker than anyone else in the gang. He ran laughing. He sat easy. He was not a bully. He was kind. His hair was dark and curly, and his teeth were white as cream. He remembered the words to all the cowboy songs and would teach you if you asked. He knew the names of all the wildflowers and when the moon would rise and set, and when the tides came in or out. He was, in fact, the only god living in the whole of Greentown, Illinois, during the 20th century that Douglas Spaulding knew of. And right now, he and Douglas were hiking out beyond town on another warm and marble-round day, the sky blue, blown glass reaching high, the creeks bright with mirror waters fanning over white stones. It was a day as perfect as the flame of a candle. Douglas walked through it thinking it would go on this way forever. The perfection, the roundness, the grass smell traveled on out ahead as far and as fast as the speed of light. The sound of a good friend whistling like an oriole, pegging the softball. As you horse-danced, key jingled the dusty paths. All of it was complete. Everything could be touched. Things stayed near. Things were at hand and would remain. It was such a fine day, and then suddenly a cloud crossed the sky, covered the sun, and did not move again. John Huff had been speaking quietly for several minutes. Now Douglas stopped on the path and looked over at him. "John, say that again. You heard me the first time, Doug. Did you say you were going away? Got my train ticket here in my pocket. Woo, woo, clang, shush, 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 woo." His voice faded. John took the yellow and green train ticket solemnly from his pocket, and they both looked at it. "Tonight?" said Douglas. "My gosh! Tonight we were going to play red light, green light, and statues. How come all of a sudden? You've been here in Greentown all my life. You just don't pick up and leave." It's my father, said John. He's got a job in Milwaukee. We weren't sure until today. My gosh, here it is with a Baptist picnic next week and the big carnival Labor Day and Halloween. Can't your dad wait till then? John shook his head. Good grief, said Douglas. Let me sit down. They sat under an old oak tree on the side of the hill looking back at town, and the sun made large trembling shadows around them. It was cool as a cave in under the tree. Out beyond in sunlight, the town was painted with heat, the windows all gaping. Douglas wanted to run back in there where the town by its very weight, its houses, their bulk, might enclose and prevent John's ever getting up and running off. But we're friends, Douglas said helplessly. We always will be, said John. You'll come back to visit every week or so, won't you? Dad says only once or twice a year. It's 80 miles. 80 miles ain't far, shouted Douglas. No, it's not far at all, said John. My grandma's got a phone. I'll call you, or maybe we'll all visit up your way, too. That'd be great. John said nothing for a long while. Well, said Douglas, let's talk about something. What? My gosh, if you're going away, we got a million things to talk about. All the things we would have talked about next month, the month after. Praying mantises, zeppelins, acrobats, sword swallowers. Go on like you was back there, grasshoppers spitting tobacco. Funny thing is, I don't feel like talking about grasshoppers. You always did. Sure. John looked steadily at the town. But I guess this just ain't the time. John, what's wrong? You look funny. John had closed his eyes and screwed up his face. Doug? The Turl House. Upstairs, you know? Sure. The colored window panes on the little round windows? Have they always been there? Sure. You positive? Darn old windows been there since before we were born. Why? I never saw them before today, said John. On the way walking through town, I looked up and there they were. Doug, what was I doing all those years? I didn't see them. You had other things to do. Did I? John turned and looked in a kind of panic at Douglas. Oh, gosh, Doug. Why should those darn windows scare me? I mean, that's nothing to be scared of, is it? It's just, he floundered, it's just if I didn't see those windows until today, what else did I miss? And what about all the things I did see here in town? Will I be able to remember them when I go away? Anything you want to remember, you remember. I went to camp 2 summers ago. Up there, I remembered. No, you didn't. You told me. You woke nights and couldn't remember your mother's face. No, some nights it happens to me in my own house. Scares heck out of me. I got to go in my folks' room and look at their faces while they sleep, to be sure, and I go back to my room and lose it again. Gosh, Doug, oh gosh! He held onto his knees tight. Promise me just one thing, Doug. Promise you'll remember me? Promise you'll remember my face and everything? Will you promise? Easy as pie. Got a motion picture machine in my head. Lying in bed nights, I can just turn on the light in my head, and out it comes on the wall, clear as heck. And there you'll be, yelling and waving at me. Shut your eyes, Doug. Now tell me, what color eyes I got? Don't peek. What color eyes I got? Douglas began to sweat. His eyelids twitched nervously. Oh, heck, John, that's not fair. Tell me, brown. John turned away. No, sir. What do you mean, no? You're not even close. John closed his eyes. Turn around here, said Douglas. Open up, let me see. It's no use, said John. You forgot already, just the way I said. Turn around here. Douglas grabbed him by the hair and turned him slowly. Okay, Doug. John opened his eyes. Green. Douglas, dismayed, let his hand drop. Your eyes are green. Well, that's close to brown, almost hazel. Doug, don't lie to me. All right, said Doug quietly. I won't. They sat there listening to the other boys running up the hill, shrieking and yelling at them. They raced along the railroad tracks, opened their lunch in brown paper sacks, and sniffed deeply the wax-wrapped deviled ham sandwiches and green sea pickles and colored peppermints. They ran and ran again, and Douglas bent to scorch his ear on the hot steel rails, hearing trains so far away they were unseen voyagings in other lands, sending Morse code messages to him here under the killing sun. Douglas stood up stunned. John! For John was running, and this was terrible, because if you ran, time ran. You yelled and screamed and raced and rolled and tumbled, and all of a sudden the sun was gone, and the whistle was blowing, and you were on your long way home to supper. When you weren't looking, the sun got around behind you. The only way to keep things slow was to watch everything and do nothing. You could stretch a day to 3 days, sure, just by watching. John! There was no way to get him to help now, save by trick. John, ditch! Ditch the others! Yelling, Douglas and John sprinted off, kiting the wind downhill, letting gravity work for them over meadows, around barns, until at last the sound of the pursuers faded. John and Douglas climbed into a haystack which was like a great bonfire crisping under them. Let's not do anything, said John. Just what I was going to say, said Douglas. They sat quietly, getting their breath. There was a small sound like an insect in the hay. They both heard it, but they didn't look at the sound. When Douglas moved his wrist, the sound ticked in another part of the haystack. When he brought his arm round on his lap, the sound ticked in his lap. He let his eyes fall in a brief flicker. The watch said 3 o'clock. Douglas moved his right hand stealthily to the ticking, pulled out the watch stem. He set the hands back. Now they had all the time they would ever need to look long and close at the world, feel the sun move like a fiery wind over the sky. But at last John must have felt the bodiless weight of their shadows shift and lean, and he spoke. Doug, what time is it? 2:30. John looked at the sky. Don't, thought Douglas. Looks more like 3:30, 4, said John. Boy Scout, you learn them things. Douglas sighed and slowly turned the watch ahead. John watched him do this silently. Douglas looked up. John punched him, not hard at all, in the arm. With a swift stroke, a plunge, the train came and went so quickly the boys all leapt aside, yelling, shaking their fists after it. Douglas and John with them. The train roared down the track, 200 people in it gone. The dust followed it a little way toward the south, then settled in the golden silence among the blue rails. The boys were walking home. I'm going to Cincinnati when I'm 17 and be a railroad fireman, said Charlie Woodman. I got an uncle in New York, said Jim. I'll go there and be a printer. Doug did not ask the others. Already the trains were chanting, and he saw their faces drifting off on back observation platforms or pressed to windows. One by one they slid away, and then the empty track and the summer sky and himself on another train run in another direction. Douglas felt the earth move under his feet and saw their shadows move off the grass and color the air. He swallowed hard, then gave a screaming yell, pulled back his fist, shot the indoor ball, whistling in the sky. Last one home's a rhino's behind! And they pounded down the tracks, laughing, flailing the air. There went John Huff, not touching the ground at all. And here came Douglas, touching it all the time. It was 7 o'clock, supper over, and the boys gathering one by one from the sound of their house doors slammed and their parents crying to them not to slam the doors. Douglas and Tom and Charlie and John stood among half a dozen others, and it was time for hide-and-seek and statues. Just one game, said John, then I gotta go home. The train leaves at 9. Who's going to be it? Me, said Douglas. That's the first time I ever heard of anybody volunteering to be it, said Tom. Douglas looked at John for a long moment. Start running, he said. The boys scattered, yelling. John backed away, then turned and began to lope. Douglas counted slowly. He let them run far, spread out, separate, each to his own small world. When they had got their momentum up and were almost out of sight, he took a deep breath. Statues! Everyone froze. Very quietly, Douglas moved across the lawn to where John Huff stood like an iron deer in the tree. Far away, the other boys stood, hands up, faces grimaced, eyes bright as stuffed squirrels. But here was John, alone and motionless, and no one rushing or making a great outcry to spoil this moment. Douglas walked around the statue one way, walked around the statue the other way. The statue did not move. It did not speak. It looked at the horizon, its mouth half smiling. It was like that time years ago in Chicago when they had visited a big place where the carved marble figures were, and his walking around among them in the silence. So here was John Huff with grass stains on his knees and the seat of his pants and cuts on his fingers and scabs on his elbows. Here was John Huff with the quiet tennis shoes, his feet sheathed in silence. There was the mouth that had chewed many an apricot pie come summer and said many a quiet thing or two about life and the lay of the land. And there were the eyes, not blind like statues' eyes, but filled with molten green gold. And there the dark hair blowing now north and now south, or any direction in the little breeze there was. And there the hands with all the town on them, dirt from roads and bark slivers from trees, the fingers that smelled of hemp and vine and green apple, old coins or pickled green frogs. There were the ears with the sunlight shining through them like bright warm peach wax, and here invisible his spearmint breath upon the air. "John, now," said Douglas, "don't you move so much as an eyelash. I absolutely command you to stay here and not move at all for the next 3 hours. Doug!" John's lips moved. "Freeze!" said Douglas. John went back to looking at the sky, but he was not smiling now. "I gotta go," he whispered. "Not a muscle. It's the game." "I just gotta get home now," said John. Now the statue moved, took its hands down out of the air, and turned its head to look at Douglas. They stood looking at each other. The other kids were putting their arms down now, too. "We'll play one more round," said John. "Except this time, I'm it. Run." The boys ran. "Freeze!" The boys froze, Douglas with them. "Not a muscle!" shouted John. "Not a hair!" He came and stood by Douglas. "Boy, this is the only way to do it," he said. Douglas looked off at the twilight sky. "Frozen statues, every single one of you, the next 3 minutes," said John. Douglas felt John walking around him as he had walked around John a moment ago. He felt John sock him on the arm once. Not too hard. "So long," he said. Then there was a rushing sound, and he knew without looking that there was nobody behind him now. Far away, a train whistle sounded. Douglas stood that way for a full minute, waiting for the sound of the running to fade, but it did not stop. He's still running away, but he doesn't sound any further off, thought Douglas. Why doesn't he stop running? And then he realized it was only the sound of his heart in his body. "Stop!" He jerked his hand to his chest. "Stop running! I don't like that sound!" And then he felt himself walking across the lawns among all the other statues now, and whether they too were coming to life he did not know. They did not seem to be moving at all. For that matter, he himself was only moving from the knees down. The rest of him was cold stone and very heavy. Going up the front porch of his house, he turned suddenly to look at the lawns behind him. The lawns were empty. A series of rifle shots, screen doors banged one after the other, a sunset volley along the street. Statues are best, he thought. They're the only things you can keep on your lawn. Don't ever let them move. Once you do, you can't do a thing with them. Suddenly his fist shot out like a piston from his side, and it shook itself hard at the lawns and the street in the gathering dusk. His face was choked with blood. His eyes were blazing. "John!" he cried. "You, John! John, you're my enemy, you hear? You're no friend of mine. Don't come back now, ever. Get away, you enemy, you hear? That's what you are. It's all off between us. You're dirt, that's all dirt. John, you hear me, John?" As if a wick had been turned a little lower, in a great clear lamp beyond the town, the sky darkened still more. He stood on the porch, his mouth gasping and working, his fist still thrust straight out at that house across the street and down the way. He looked at the fist, and it dissolved. The world dissolved beyond it. Going upstairs in the dark, where he could only feel his face but see nothing of himself, not even his fist, he told himself over and over, "I'm mad, I'm angry, I hate him. I'm mad, I'm angry, I hate him." 10 minutes later, slowly, he reached the top of the stairs in the dark. That portion of Dandelion Wine, which I have called on occasion Illuminations, is the result of a very real experience I had when I was a boy. I think we go through a number of similar experiences. I remember when I was 14, I discovered for the first time I was capable of dying. I was watching a bunch of cowboys rushing across a screen, shooting at one another, and it suddenly hit me, hey, that could happen to me someday. And suddenly death really did mean me. I think it took all those years for me to discover it about myself. I think we all come to this realization at a different time in our lives. And we all, in a different way, on a different kind of day, in a different year, different month, different hour, have that moment of personal revelation where we discover we're alive for the first time. Sometimes children discover it when they're 7 or 8 and say, hey, what's going on? And sometimes it comes a little later. I think I was around 9 or 10 when I made that real discovery that I was inside my own skin looking out. And that's a great day. And so when I was writing Dandelion Wine, I did a whole series of excursions into my own past, trying to find those special days when something extraordinary happened, something was discovered, or something was lost or gained. So for what it's worth, this story is that particular day in my life when for the first time I realized I was inside my skin. Crossing the lawn that morning, Douglas Spaulding broke a spider web with his face. A single invisible line on the air touched his brow and snapped without a sound. So, with the subtlest of incidents, he knew that this day was going to be different. It would be different also because, as his father explained, driving Douglas and his 10-year-old brother Tom out of town toward the country, there were some days compounded completely of odor, nothing but the world blowing in one nostril and out the other. And some days, he went on, were days of hearing every trump and trill of the universe. Some days were good for tasting, and some for touching, and some days were good for all the senses at once. This day now, he nodded, smelled as if a great and nameless orchard had grown up overnight beyond the hills to fill the entire visible land with its warm freshness. The air felt like rain, but there were no clouds. Momentarily, a stranger might laugh off in the woods, but there was silence. Douglas watched the traveling land. He smelled no orchards and sensed no rain, for without apple trees or clouds, he knew neither could exist. And as for that stranger laughing deep in the woods, yet the fact remained. Douglas shivered. This, without reason, was a special day. The car stopped at the very center of the quiet forest. All right, boys, behave. They'd been jostling elbows. Yes, sir. They climbed out, carrying the blue tin pails away from the lonely dirt road into the smell of fallen rain. Look for bees, said Father. Bees hang around grapes like boys around kitchens. Doug? Douglas looked up suddenly. You're off 1,000,000 miles, said Father. Look alive. Walk with us. Yes, sir. And they walked through the forest, Father very tall, Douglas moving in his shadow, and Tom very small, trotting in his brother's shade. They came to a little rise and looked ahead. Here, did they see? Father pointed. Here was where the big summer-quiet winds lived and passed in the green depths, like ghost whales, unseen. Douglas looked quickly, saw nothing, and felt put upon by his father, who, like Grandpa, lived on riddles. But still... Douglas paused and listened. Yes, something's going to happen, he thought. I know it. Here's Maidenhair Fern. Dad walked, the tin pail belling in his fist. Feel this? He scuffed the earth. 1,000,000 years of good, rich leaf mold laid down. Think of the autumns that got by to make this. Boy, I walk like an Indian, said Tom. Not a sound. Douglas felt but did not feel the deep loam, listening, watchful. We're surrounded, he thought. It'll happen. What? He stopped. Come out, wherever you are, whatever you are, he cried silently. Tom and Dad strolled on the hushed earth ahead. Finest lace there is, said Dad quietly. and he was gesturing up through the trees above to show them how it was woven across the sky or how the sky was woven into the trees. He wasn't sure which. But there it was, he smiled, and the weaving went on, green and blue, if you watched and saw the forest shift its humming loom. Dad stood comfortably saying this and that, the words easy in his mouth. He made it easier by laughing at his own declarations just so often. He liked to listen to the silence, he said, if silence could be listened to. For, he went on, in that silence you could hear wildflower pollen sifting down the bee-fried air, by God. The bee-fried air! Listen, the waterfall of bird-song beyond those trees. Now, thought Douglas, here it comes, running. I don't see it, running, almost on me. Fox grapes, said Father. We're in luck. Look here. Don't, Douglas gasped. But Tom and Dad bent down to shove their hands deep in rattling bush. The spell was shattered. The terrible prowler, the magnificent runner, the leaper, the shaker of souls, vanished. Douglas, lost and empty, fell to his knees. He saw his fingers sink through green shadow and come forth stained with such color that it seemed he had somehow cut the forest and delved his hand in the open wound. Lunchtime, boys! With buckets half burdened with fox grapes and wild strawberries, followed by bees, which were no more, no less, said Father, the world humming under its breath. They sat on a green mossed log, chewing sandwiches, and trying to listen to the forest the same way Father did. Douglas felt Dad watching him, quietly amused. Dad started to say something that had crossed his mind, but instead tried another bite of sandwich and mused over it. Sandwich outdoors isn't a sandwich anymore. Tastes different than indoors. Notice? Got more spice. Tastes like mint and pine sap. Does wonders for the appetite. Douglas's tongue hesitated on the texture of bread and deviled ham. No, it was just a sandwich. Tom chewed and nodded. No, just what you mean, Dad. It almost happened, thought Douglas. Whatever it was big. My gosh, it was big. Something scared it off. Where is it now? Back of that bush? No. Behind me? No. Here, almost here. He kneaded his stomach secretly. If I wait, it'll come back. It won't hurt. Somehow I know it's not here to hurt me. What then? What? You know how many baseball games we played this year? Last year? Year before? Said Tom, apropos of nothing. Douglas watched Tom's quickly moving lips. Wrote it down. 1,568 games. How many times I brushed my teeth in 10 years? 6,000. Washed my hands? 15,000. Slept? 4,000 some odd times, not counting naps. Ate 600 peaches, 800 apples, pears, 200. I'm not hot for pears. Name a thing, I got the statistics. Runs to the billion millions. Things I'd done, add 'em up in 10 years. Now, thought Douglas, it's coming close again. Why? Tom talking? But why Tom? Tom chatting along, mouth crammed with sandwich, Dad there, alert as a mountain cat on the log, and Tom letting the words rise like quick soda bubbles in his mouth. Books I read, 400. Matinees I seen, 40 Buck Joneses, 30 Jack Hoxseys, 45 Tom Mixes, 39 Hoot Gibsons, 192 single and separate Felix the Cat cartoons, 10 Douglas Fairbankses, 8 repeats on Lon Chaney and the Phantom of the Opera, 4 Milton Silleses, and 1 Adolphe Menjou thing about love where I spent 90 hours in the theater toilet waiting for the mush to be over so I could see the cat and the canary, or the bat, where everybody held on to everybody else and screamed for 2 hours without letting go. During that time, I figure 400 lollipops, 300 Tootsie Rolls, 700 ice cream cones. Tom rolled quietly along his way for another 5 minutes, and then Dad said, How many berries you picked so far, Tom? 256, on the nose, said Tom instantly. Dad laughed, and lunch was over, and they moved again into the shadows to find fox grapes and the tiny wild strawberries, bent down, all three of them, hands coming and going, the pails getting heavy, and Douglas holding his breath, thinking, Yes, it's near again, breathing on my neck almost. Don't look. Work, just pick, fill up the pail. If you look, you'll scare it off. Don't lose it this time. But how? How do you bring it around here where you can see it? Stare it right in the eye. How? Got a snowflake in a matchbox, said Tom, smiling at the wine glove on his hand. Shut up! Douglas wanted to yell. But no, the yell would scare the echoes and run the thing away. And wait, the more Tom talked, the closer the great thing came. It wasn't scared of Tom. Tom drew it with his breath. Tom was part of it. "Last February," said Tom, and chuckled. "Held a matchbox up in a snowstorm. Let one old snowflake fall in, shut it up, ran inside the house, stashed it in the icebox." Close, very close. Douglas stared at Tom's flickering lips. He wanted to jump around, for he felt a vast tidal wave lift up behind the forest. In an instant it would smash down, crush them forever. "Yes, sir," mused Tom, picking grapes. "I'm the only guy in all Illinois who's got a snowflake in summer. Precious as diamonds, by gosh. Tomorrow I'll open it, Doug. You can look, too." Any other day, Douglas might have snorted, struck out, denied it all. But now, with the great thing rushing near, falling down in the clear air above him, he could only nod, eyes shut. Tom, puzzled, stopped picking berries and turned to stare over at his brother. Douglas, hunched over, was an ideal target. Tom leapt, yelling, landed. They fell, thrashed, and rolled. "No!" Douglas squeezed his mind shut. "No, but suddenly, yes, it's all right, yes. The tangle, the contact of bodies, the falling tumble had not scared off the tidal sea that crashed now, flooding and washing them along the shore of grass, deep through the forest. Knuckles struck his mouth. He tasted rusty warm blood, grabbed Tom hard, held him tight, and so in silence they lay, hearts churning, nostrils hissing, and at last, slowly, afraid he would find nothing, Douglas opened one eye. And everything, absolutely everything, was there. The world, like a great iris of an even more gigantic eye, which had also just opened and stretched out to encompass everything, stared back at him. And he knew what it was that had leapt upon him to stay and would not run away now. "I'm alive," he thought. His fingers trembled, bright with blood, like the bits of a strange flag, now found and before unseen, and him wondering what country and what allegiance he owed to it. Holding Tom, but not knowing him there, he touched his free hand to that blood, as if it could be peeled away, held up, turned over. Then he let go of Tom and lay on his back with his hand up to the sky, and he was a head from which his eyes peered like sentinels through the portcullis of a strange castle, out along a bridge, his arm to those fingers where the bright pennant of blood quivered in the light. "You all right, Doug?" asked Tom. His voice was at the bottom of a green moss well somewhere under water, secret removed. The grass whispered under his body. He put his arm down, feeling the sheath of fuzz on it, and far away below, his toes creaking in his shoes. The wind sighed over his shelled ears. The world slipped bright over the glassy round of his eyeballs, like images sparked in a crystal sphere. Flowers were sun and fiery spots of sky strewn through the woodland. Birds flickered like skipped stones across the vast inverted pond of heaven. His breath raked over his teeth, going in ice, coming out fire. Insects shocked the air with electric clearness. 10,000 individual hairs grew a millionth of an inch on his head. He heard the twin hearts beating in each ear, the third heart beating in his throat, the two hearts throbbing his wrists, the real heart pounding his chest. The million pores on his body opened. "I'm really alive," he thought. "I never knew it before, or if I did, I don't remember." He yelled it loud, but silent a dozen times. Think of it, think of it! 12 years old, and only now discovering this rare timepiece, this clock gold bright and guaranteed to run 70, left under a tree and found while wrestling. "Doug, you okay?" Douglas yelled, grabbed Tom, and rolled. "Doug, you're crazy, crazy!" They spilled downhill, the sun in their mouths, in their eyes like shattered lemon glass, gasping like trout thrown out on a bank, laughing till they cried. "Doug, you're not mad?" "No, no, 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 no." Douglas, eyes shut, saw spotted leopards pad in the dark. "Tom!" Then quieter. "Tom! Does everyone in the world know he's alive?" "Sure." "Heck yes." The leopards trotted soundlessly off through darker lands where eyeballs could not turn to follow. "I hope they do," whispered Douglas. "Oh, I sure hope they know." Douglas opened his eyes. Dad was standing high up above him, there in the green-leaved sky, laughing, hands on hips. Their eyes met. Douglas quickened. Dad knows, he thought. It was all planned. He's brought us here on purpose so this could happen to me. He's in on it. He knows it all. And now he knows that I know. A hand came down and seized him through the air, swayed on his feet with Tom and Dad still bruised and rumpled, puzzled and awed. Douglas held his strange-boned elbows tenderly and licked the fine cut lip with satisfaction. Then he looked at Dad and Tom. I'll carry all the pails, he said. This once, let me haul everything. They handed over the pails with quizzical smiles. He stood swaying slightly, the forest collected, full-weighted and heavy with syrup, clenched hard in his down-slung hands. I want to feel all there is to feel, he thought. Let me feel tired now. Let me feel tired. I mustn't forget. I'm alive. I know I'm alive. I mustn't forget it tonight or tomorrow or the day after that. The bees followed, and the smell of fox grapes and yellow summer followed as he walked, heavy-laden and half-drunk, his fingers wondrously calloused, arms numb, feet stumbling, so his father caught his shoulder. No, mumbled Douglas. I'm all right. I'm fine. It took half an hour for the sense of the grass, the roots, the stones, the bark of the mossy log to fade from where they had patterned his arms and legs and back. While he pondered this, let it slip, slide, dissolve away, his brother and his quiet father followed behind, allowing him to pathfind the forest alone out toward that incredible highway which would take them back to the town.